Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first talk of our Cerulean Guest Speaker Series for Season 5. I'm Devin, the Salty Robot. Excited today to bring you our first guest, Chris Meddings, and so let's bring him on into the studio.
Hi.
Hey, Chris, how's it going?
Fine, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing well,
Good.
Maintaining.
Good.
Yeah. A little bit late over there for you. Hope your day was good.
I mean, 8 p.m. is not too bad at all. So,
Nice.
yeah, it's been a good day. I've been working on projects today, which is always a good day. So,
Very good.
yeah.
Feeling good and motivated around that? Feeling
It's the thing. I never don't feel motivated to make models.
nice.
I know other people like occasionally lose the motivation,
Yeah.
and they're like, "How do you stay motivated?" I don't know. I just always am.
You're just always kind of looking for it, even if you have multiple projects, your brain's still kind of going to it and going back to it. And
Always got ideas and always something I want to work on.
yeah,
And because
is
I
it
always
kind
have
of
lots going on at the same time, I never get that point where you finish something. What do I do next? Because there's always something else that needs to be finished.
nice, another iron in the fire kind of thing?
Yeah, too many.
Do you find that there's kind of a multiple layer of that motivation of you're eager to do it, but it's also kind of a release, a hobby, kind of the flow, the nature of flow that we get into in these things that is soothing to our souls or kind of helps unwind after a day or is a
Well, we're
release for
probably
you?
possibly jumping into this a bit early, but um, I have quite bad anxiety and OCD, obsessive compulsive thoughts, and not like door handles and stuff like the cliche. And it lets me let go of that. I kind of when I'm working on a model or doing some CAD design or working on a business or something, I so focused on what I'm doing that it's kind of like mindfulness, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. I deal with that a lot in the same. A lot of
Mm.
the anxieties that I have are really kind of put to rest when I start making with my hands and things like that. I'm very much focused on the now and um, either consciously or unconsciously trying to hit that state of flow where I'm balancing the challenge versus task and ability. So I can see how that can be really rewarding, especially for you as a fellow anxiety sufferer.
Yeah, I
Is
don't think a
anxiety
lot of people
is that new
understand.
for you?
No, my earliest memory, I was probably about 6, and it's an embarrassing memory. I mean, the thing is now I look back on it and it wasn't something that was remotely embarrassing. It's quite funny, in fact, but I was deeply embarrassed at the time, and that basically that's been it then for the rest of my life is always worried or anxious about something. It's
Yeah.
just only when I was in my 30s that I understood it was a mental thing, and that it was a health thing, and that it wasn't just like how everyone was.
Yeah, that was similar for me. My anxiety is from some of my earliest memories, and lifelong struggled with it. And then it really wasn't until my 30s, late 30s, early 40s when it was like, I'm not just particular. I'm not just
Mm.
height. I just don't have a heightened sense of awareness. Just because I'm actually very anxious. I'm actually struggling with a lot of different things that anxiety can be fueled off of and feed off of and triggered by. So it's difficult. I think I, I think it's kind of duality for me. A lot of it, I try to find peace in a whole like name it, tame it kind of thing. Once I kind of know what's happening, then okay, let's start to apply tools. Let's start to take measures to deal with this. And on the other hand, I think it can be kind of a little disheartening. I think it can just be a little hard when you look back and you're like, oh wow, like I wish I would have known sooner, or
Mm.
understanding how events shape your life and um, leads to kind of a shoulda, coulda, woulda attitude, which just does nothing for the past or the present. So um, yeah, it's difficult. So I'm glad you're able to find some relief with that.
I don't think people that don't have it appreciate that it is 24/7, 365
Mhm.
days a year. From the moment you're awake, and actually when you're asleep, the dreams as well, till the moment you go to sleep, definitely as a conscious, being conscious, you're constantly thinking about something. And it's just,
Yeah.
even if it's not a negative thing, it's just constant thoughts and churn. and it's exhausting. It really is. And so to be able to do something that makes it go quiet for a while is it's gold dust. It really is. In fact,
Yeah.
go and do something else and I can't do it. That makes me really anxious because then I can't get that time.
Do you find that have you started any sort of medications, or have you talked to therapists or anything about this? Have you been formally diagnosed with OCD and anxiety or severe anxiety disorder? Do you have social anxiety?
With severe anxiety, yeah. OCD, that's that's a self-diagnosis. It's like that's even worse in the medical qualification stakes than Dr. Google. But yeah, I return to the same thoughts again and again and again, and they're intrusive. I don't want to think of them, but I do
Yeah.
think of them. I suppose on a
Yep.
subconscious level, I do. It's like probing a cavity in a tooth or something. You can't stay away from it. And then once I start, it becomes a downward spiral where I think about it, and then I think how that could be worse, and how that could be worse, and how that could be worse, and it goes down and down and down and down and down until it
Start
becomes a full-blown kind of
storytelling.
well,
Yep. And
catastrophizing, really. Yeah.
Do you suffer from panic attacks? Does it become
Yeah,
where it
sometimes.
is
Yeah.
disabling or crippling in a way?
I have some social anxiety, but it like really crowded or noisy. Anything with a lot of like auditory visual stimulus is too much. Like crowded places with live music and stuff like that.
Yep.
Sometimes I can go, but usually I can't. So I don't have social anxiety as such, but I do have anxiety that's triggered by being out. And in fact, so much so that I try not to leave the house. Well, I say I try not to. My impulse is to not to. I actually try to leave because I know it's healthy to get out. But
Yep.
But if I could, I'd stay indoors all day, every day.
I think it's important just being able to recognize that, right? Because then you can kind of pick the situations where you're like, okay, like I'm gonna go out and go to a movie or have dinner with my partner, or or even just go for a walk, but understanding when it's too much or what could be essentially a trigger or a risk for causing that, I think is really important, because then it allows us, at least for myself, because I'm very similar to you. Like I used to be a very social person. I did live paintings and all these things, and now I get very uncomfortable in crowded spaces, loud places. We were just out to dinner last night and it was very uncomfortable. And so I find a lot of peace usually just out in nature on the trails. I find it's funny. I feel safer in very remote places that most people would consider very unsafe than I do in downtown, or at a movie theater or at a concert. And my anxiety is just completely overwhelming at certain points.
Do you think that's because you're alone there? I mean, really alone, apart from the animals and the trees?
Yes, it's I really struggle with the vibration of so many people, and the machines, and just the static that is the city, that is modern living. And so it really calms down for me when I'm just kind of out and away. It's a much more natural vibration or rhythm to life when I'm out there. Um, and it's just, I've really been exploring it with my therapist for the last year or so, just why it's so comfortable for me, why it's so comfortable to put myself in very dangerous situations, and there's never that sense of anxiety. There's never the sense of it's not fear, but yeah, just the anxious that something's going to happen, or something that can happen, or what if something happens. And like you're saying, this spiral, the storytelling that begins to happen. For me, it's I understand that there's variables, there are animals, there's weather, there's all these things that are, while they're outside of my control, the natural order of things feels more like I can rely on it more. It feels more consistent. I would
None
say
of
that,
those things are
like,
personal either.
yeah.
I mean, when you're surrounded by other people, you're constantly, I don't know about you, but I'm constantly hyper aware of how they interact with me.
Oh
Whereas
yes,
animals
very much
don't
so.
flying crap about you. They're just gonna, in fact, they'd rather stay away. They're just going about their business.
Yep.
So you kind of, they're not they're not remotely interested in you, and whereas people can be very, I don't know. At least in your head, you can make them very dangerous.
For sure. And I struggle kind of like, with my anxiety, I have multiple, it's like a room full of people working on things in my head.
Mm.
So there's all of these thoughts happening all the time in parallel and tangent, all these things. And so when I go into public spaces, I become hyper aware and I can hear conversations at other it's noise to me. It's everywhere. Um, and it becomes very hard to focus on at times. Um, and then, yeah, we layer in some of my, I mask to a degree through my ADHD and stuff like that. So to be what I would perceive as socially acceptable behavior, I try and mirror, other people and other situations and things like that, or really throttle just even myself because I don't want to over present and have that then be something that is either judged or I think is being judged.
Mm.
And so it becomes very exhausting. I don't have social anxiety, but I very much have um, severe anxiety disorder. Like I just generalized anxiety is very bad for me. It's gotten a lot better. I did a treatment that was specifically targeting anxiety and post traumatic stress syndrome earlier this year, and it really helped. But as of lately, my anxiety has been coming back, and that was large part in due to getting COVID.
It's interesting what you said about masking. That's something I really identify with. That who you are in front of other people isn't who you are, and you feel like you have to
Yeah,
put on a mask, and it is incredibly exhausting to be someone else.
it
Even if
it's
that
so
person is
exhausting.
quite close to who you are, if it's
Yeah,
not really who you are, it's
yeah. Yeah, there was early in my therapy years, we were discovering because I've just never felt safe, and that's a lot due to just my very early post traumatic, the trauma just that I suffered very early on, and my therapist presented as like I'm always wearing a suit of armor. It's always something where
mm,
I'm in there, I'm talking to you, but I'm also very guarded. I'm very, it's very kind of one dimensional. You see this, and so we really tried to expand my wardrobe and what I would wear as a suit of armor. And so could it be something that was necessarily a suit of armor, or could it be something like, for lack of better words, like a James Bond tuxedo, right? Where it's bulletproof,
mm.
but it's at least more approachable. It's at least something that's a little bit more accepted by society. And so really trying to learn that helped me a bit kind of not have to mask as much or be as on guard or on edge or as anxious about an interaction.
Yeah, I didn't. Possibly a bit personal. Well, I suppose it's not really. I didn't have any particular childhood trauma, so I don't know where my anxiety comes from. In fact, I had a very good family. I was very lucky, very secure. But
Well,
it
even
just goes
your
to show that
experience that you had
anyone can have
could
it.
be
Yeah.
traumatic.
Mm,
I always used to think trauma came from a car accident or a
mm.
death or um, combat, right? These really extreme things that can happen, but it can also come from emotional abuse. It can come from a singular event that happens where we're really shook to our core, whether it's through embarrassment, whether it's through pain, these different types of things that can happen. And they've really started to understand trauma as this really kind of larger thing that can begin to shape some of these other behaviors, such as anxiety, depression, OCD, things like that. Like, well, if I do this, like that thing won't happen again. Um, and so it's
Oh,
really
that's
interesting.
sorry. Go on.
I was just going to say it's just really interesting, just from a standpoint. My wife read a book called "The Body Keeps Score," and some of the excerpts from there were just, it was really profound. And you're like, wow, like, so these micro traumas can really add up over time, things like that. The pandemic was traumatic to some people, losing all of that. So it's really starts to become relative to the individual.
In a way, for me, the pandemic was heaven because it took away the requirement for me to interact with other people.
Yeah. I'm the same way. I'm like,
At the
everybody
same
kind of seemed
time,
to, they
go on.
have forced to kind of care about each other, and
Mm,
and everything was kind of a lot quieter. I was the same way.
yeah. That being said, though, my wife also has a I think you mentioned to me your partner has a condition which was made them vulnerable with COVID. My wife does too. So at the same time, it was intensely frustrating to see people not keeping distance and wearing masks, and still is to this day, to not wearing masks and to treating it like it's just gone away and that it was never a thing to begin with and all this stuff.
Yeah, it's been really hard. I really felt free and clear of my anxiety for the most part this year, and then within the last 4 to 5 weeks, it's really come back,
Mm.
pretty acutely, which has been really unfortunate.
Why do you think that is?
I got so I think so I struggle a lot from a standpoint. I'm a big empath. So for me, I when the world's on fire, I feel on fire, and that's something that I've had to work through in a lot of ways. But not feeling comfortable, so not feeling safe in society for the most part, has always been there. But through COVID and starting to take precautions, I felt a certain sense of safety with, masking up, washing hands, keeping distance, things like that. And as those things went down, we still kept up with it. We still kept masked. We still went through the precautions. And um, for lack of better words, I got complacent and had a afternoon with my wife, which was lovely. Went to the movies and the comic book shop and the store. And, it was just all these quick kind of stops, and nobody was in the movie theater for the most part. We try to, again, just do things that are minimize the variables.
Mm.
And catching COVID during that time was one very upsetting, and really kind of sparked that kind of just concern around being in social spaces and what sort of care and consideration others are having for each other. And then two, the biggest one for me is losing my ability to run, losing my ability to operate at this competitive level that I've always operated at. And I lost that about 4 to 5 years ago when I got sick. The anxiety and the stress were literally killing me. I lost 20% of my body weight. Doctors thought I had cancer. And it took years to regain my strength. It took at least 6 to 8 months to put the weight back on in a healthy manner. And then I struggled with reflux for a number of years. And for the past 2 years, I've been learning to run again. And I grew up as a runner and a biker, and just, again, I was competitive sports my whole life and stuff. And so losing all of those things, I had already had so much anxiety around it. And I was finally at a place where I was like, oh, it's starting to work. It's like all of this time, effort, and energy and money that I put into this is really starting to pay off. And it just was all gone in just the flash of an afternoon. And so it's been a lot of anxiety around, when will I get better? What if I don't get better? And so I begin to spiral. And so I have to stay very grounded in the sense of okay, I will get better. I just have to take it slow and things like that. But there's still that anxiety. There's still the what ifs, right? Nothing's certain. Nothing's promised.
And with anxiety, it's always what ifs. You can never
Yeah, always.
there's always that little voice in the back of your head saying, what if you're wrong?
Yeah. It's all about going through a checklist of variables for me before any sort of situation or choice or things like that. Cause I'm always like, well, what if this? What if that? And of course, Murphy shows up at some point and screws it up. But it's hard. It's really hard. And then layer that on with severe depression, and you've got a recipe for
It's a pretty potent mix.
some pretty tough stuff. So,
do you find you need to know what's going to happen before things happen? Like if you're going out, you need a plan of what you're doing.
100%.
Yeah, me
Yep.
too.
How about
In
yourself?
fact, I think that's why my anxiety came from. I think I've always needed certainty about what's going to be happening.
Yeah.
And because you can't, it started when I started to think, well, what could go wrong? Because if I know about it, then I can plan for it and I can deal with it if it happens. And that became a habit. But at some point, it stopped being about future-proofing whatever plan you had, and became about really bizarre, what's the word, far-fetched ideas of things that could happen.
Yep.
But because I'm very good at visualizing things mentally, which is great for modeling, terrible for anxiety, they became incredibly realistic to me.
Yes.
And you kind of
Yep.
lose the ability to judge what's realistic and what, frankly, is extremely unlikely.
Yep.
And I think that's
And
part of it.
at that point, you're starting to really traumatize your nervous system. You're putting your body through a fight or flight situation that isn't happening. And that can be incredibly hard on our adrenaline system, on our nervous system, and just be exhausting. At the end of the day, we can live 1,000 lives just in our thinking, and none of those are going to happen. But yet, at the end of the day, we're just exhausted from it.
I have to think it's probably bad for your heart too, because your
Very
heart
bad.
races, and there's only so much it can take with that.
Yep.
I think even if I haven't physically done much during the day, I go to bed absolutely exhausted because you've been operating adrenaline-wise and mentally at sort of peak operational capacity all
Yep.
day, just from feeling like you might need to do something immediately. And it really, I think more than anything, that's what people don't understand, just how exhausting it is.
Yeah, it's a constant state of fight or flight, and your body
Yeah.
is dumping those cortisol and other chemicals all day long that are just they're not meant to do that, and we're not meant to do that. And yeah, it's extremely taxing on your heart, and makes I find myself exhausted, but then I lay down and my mind's still going, and it just becomes
Yeah,
this
your mind
just
won't stop. Your body's had it, but your mind.
very much so. And and I'm going out and running. Usually when I'm running and working out, I'm doing 6 days a week. I'm doing, 50 miles in a week. I'm lifting weights, like I'm riding bike, like I'm doing all these things. So I'm trying to also just physically exhaust myself to the point that like I just I collapse kind of thing in hopes that I can just sleep. And um I've found that really working on my heart rate has helped me greatly in kind of calming my anxiety. I don't know if I mentioned it to you, but the Muse is a biofeedback device that I've used for um, almost 15 years at this point, and it's been a game changer for me in helping slow down my cardiovascular system, help with my heart rate, things like that. Um, and I recommend it for anybody who has anxiety because it's one of those things where if you're having an anxious moment, you can sit down. It's basically, kind of a breathing technique, like the 487, the 333s, all these different breathing techniques that really also work. But this gives audible cues when your mind becomes active, when your heart rate becomes active, kind of thing. And so you can then, okay, I'm just going back to my breathing. I'm slowing down my heart rate. And it collects all the data for you at the end so you can see how well you've done. So working with a therapist or things like that, you can always share these things, or at least have validation. It's almost a digital journal to meditation.
So does it tell you that things are starting to happen? Then it gives you a sort of
Yep.
a heads
Yep.
up, because
So
these things kind of sneak up on you, and you don't know. Before you know it, you're having this panic attack, but you don't know that you were going to be having one. You don't feel it coming, if you see what I mean. But it does, I guess.
yeah,
It picks up on it, and
yeah, it does. Well, and so you use it in, I like to use it, I coincide it with other technologies, right? So if I
mm,
know that if I'm struggling, if I'm having an anxiety attack, I'll try and sometimes look at my watch and see what my heart rate's at. And if I have an
yeah,
elevated heart rate and that's consistent, then sometimes I'll set my watch to notify me when I'm having an elevated heart rate. So that'll, again, biofeedback is essentially recognizing changes in the body and alerting you through sound. And so you can do that with a watch, things like that. The Muse does it in ways where you can have. Um, so I listen to the crickets at night,
mm,
is one of the ones, and the crickets will become louder as your brain becomes louder, or they begin to quiet, and there starts to become this rhythm. And birds will chirp occasionally, letting you know that now your mind is calm, like you've reached a sense
mm.
of calmness. And so you begin to learn to recognize those signs, um, without the device. So like if you're sitting in a car and you're like, oh, like I'm stressed out and like my heart rate's racing, I'm going to breathe through this and I'm going to remember, I'm going to look for that feeling, that sensation of like just when all your jaw unclenches kind of thing.
People that don't wear glasses won't recognize this, but when you do manage for a brief second to sort of be in the moment and be relaxed, it's like trying on a new pair of glasses and everything's suddenly much sharper, because you don't
Yes.
realize how the old ones have got weaker and weaker and your eyes have got weaker or whatever. It's that same kind of feeling. It's like you've been wearing sunglasses, you take them off and you can see everything so much brighter. And it's really strange. But just for that moment,
Mm-hmm.
it's so nice just to feel that.
Yep. Yeah, it's just a sense of calm that washes over, which is really nice.
But you feel like you're
I
in
also
the
do,
world for once rather than in your head.
yeah, very much so. I'll go and do, are you familiar with sensory deprivation chambers
I know
or
what they
float
are, yeah.
tanks? Yeah, so float tanks are great from a standpoint of going into it and, you're complete, it's just you and your mind at this point. And so learning to kind of either let it go and let it happen. And I was told this once when I first started doing sensory deprivation chambers, that as these thoughts come to you, think about running through a forest. And you're running through this forest and there's a deer that comes up, and that's a thought. And you don't need to interact with the deer, just run past it. Like your goal is to get to this opening, this setting in the forest that is that moment of like trying on the new glasses, right? It's that moment where it's just everything's calm, like there's no wind, like it's just settled. But as you're going through it, the skunk, the deer, the owl, the trees are all thoughts. And it's not to ignore them, but to allow them to come and to go, and to not be like, well, what type of tree was that? Like, was that a
Mm.
male deer or a female deer? It doesn't matter. Just like acknowledge a thought and let it go. And I found that that really helped getting me to a place of a very calm mind in these tanks, because they're completely blacked out. You float, so you lose sense of gravity. Like I feel like I'm upside down, or I'm even standing up in the tank sometimes. But when you come out, colors are just, you can taste color. Like
Mm.
it's so bright and vibrant, and you're like, wow, like this is what it's like to be in the world and not in my head. Like you sense all the sunlight filtering through the leaves and these little nuances that I feel so often people with anxiety really miss, because we are so much in a storytelling mode, trying to solve something, trying to rationalize something, trying to prepare or plan something, all of these different things that bring us anxiety. Um, we're never in the moment.
I remember when I was 10, 11, probably, noticing the smell of damp earth and wet leaves in the November, and the sound of raindrops on leaves. And gosh, this all sounds like real cliche stuff, but just noticing it, really sort of being aware of it. And I'm never aware of it now.
Yeah.
It's very, be just because there's always so much else going on.
I know that over here, the Muse is now supported by insurance. I think it
Mm.
might be supported by the NHS over there. I can send you some information on it,
Yeah,
because it
yeah, I'll
is
definitely
really
look that up.
nice
Yeah.
where you can set it up. It can be raindrops, it can
Mm.
be oceanside, it can be in a desert or a jungle, or there's these different, there's like drumming, like rhythmic drumming that you can listen to. So there's all of these different soundscapes that you can use. And so it's really just about like breathing, slowing
Mm.
down, and just kind of coming back to it. And again, I found it incredibly helpful in using the device, but then also not having the device and being somewhere where I'm like, I just need, just slow it down. Like stop the what ifs, just allow your body to relax. You're safe, or it'll be fine, whatever. I can exit this situation. We can go home, things like that. So um, it's tough.
Mm.
It's tough for a lot of people. Have you found any um, benefits through therapy?
It's too early. I've only had 2
Too
sessions.
early?
Um,
So this is, oh
the
wow.
biggest
So
benefit
wow,
to me
you're
so
very
far is,
early.
yeah. Well, the first one was, this is what it's about, basically, and tell
Yeah.
me about yourself, and that was it.
Yep.
the biggest benefit to me since going to the doctor was getting the SSRIDs. They've made a huge, or however you say it, the citalopram I'm on, a huge difference to my ability to cope.
That's
It
wonderful.
kind of takes away the worst of the panic attacks, because there's been
Yeah.
times when I've been off it where I've got almost to the point of doing something very serious. Because it's got that bad, it builds up so much that it just feels like it would be easier just to not be here anymore.
Yep.
Not that I ever would, because I have a family, and I wouldn't want to do that to them. But as long as I remember to take them, which is another difficulty with anxiety, I'm really terrible at remembering to do things and forming habits and routines. Although, ironically, if a routine's broken, I get really anxious about it. But yeah, as long as I remember to take them, they're really good.
Nice. Which one are you
There's
on?
only so far medication can take you. So
Yeah. Are you on Lexapro?
no, citalopram it's called. I don't know what
Okay.
actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a
Because
selective
there's a lot
serotonin
there's a few different
reuptake
ones.
inhibitor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I always like hearing when people have positive experiences with medication, because again, it's something else that I've really tried to destigmatize, is that medications can make a difference.
Not everyone does, I know. And I know
Yeah.
some medications, I know people have been on like Prozac and things, they come off because it made them numb. And this doesn't make me numb. It just, stops me hyper focusing on things quite so much.
Yeah. Yeah. Medication didn't work for me.
Mm.
I worked with therapists for a while, and most of my therapists, if not all of my therapists, have always said, I don't think medication's right for you, just based on my own kind of issues with control and things like that. And so, but this last year, really got so bad that I was like, I need to try something. And so I did. And the side effects were just too much for me. And
Mm.
part of it was the GP just didn't do their job and really kind of educating me on it and being like, these are the potential side of, like, this is what to, like, this is the experience that you may have, versus it was just kind of like, take this, you'll be fine. Everybody loves it. And so that was really difficult for me. And so I had to become really aggressive in how I went about it. And I was able to find this ketamine treatment, which is worked fantastic. But that's, I coincide that with my therapist, who is a trauma specialist. So I've done a lot of CBT, EMDR, um, and those have helped. But the ketamine treatment really allowed for my brain to carve new neural pathways. And I really got out of these ruts that had just been cut
Yeah.
for 40 years at this point.
That's how I described it to my therapist, that the thought patterns are kind of like when you go out for a walk in the woods and there's that really deep path that thousands of feet have gone over. And you're just constantly doing the same paths again and again and again.
Yep.
You're not going out through the woods and finding new paths. And that's what it is. It's these ruts you get stuck in, these habits of thought that you train yourself to have, ironically. They're the real killer, frankly.
For sure.
But I mean, the side
And
effects of the medication can be really bad. I mean, for me, I have had side effects, weight gain and a couple of other things. But compared to the alternative, they're not bad. But some people experience increases in suicidal thoughts and things on them. So it is really important to make sure that it's the right medication for you, and to challenge your doctor if it's not.
Yeah, and that was my biggest concern, because I've struggled with suicidal ideation for about 20 years now,
Mm.
and I've always known, no matter how bad it got. This is going to sound really sad, but I didn't want to. I didn't want to traumatize somebody by ending my life, um, even if it's just a medical personnel kind of thing. Um, and then once I got married, and my wife, like, I could never leave her. I could never do that. So that's always been something, my safeguard, as my therapist likes to call it. And doing the medications really kind of took those safety measures away, and it made me very uncomfortable. And so I let them know, and we weaned me off of it. But
Mm.
it was really hard because it was just, I didn't feel in control of myself, and um, it was very unnerving.
When I was much younger, a family member committed suicide, and I went to the funeral, and what it did to the family, and you could see what it did to them. That means I would never do that to someone, basically. But
Yeah,
for me, thinking about doing it is a kind of safety valve that you always think, no matter how bad things get, you've always got a back door to get out of, basically, which is
yeah.
really unhealthy. But that's how I started to. It's one of the things I obsess about, and I do think about. I don't think about doing it, but I think about it. If you see what I mean,
Understand. If
quite
I
a lot.
fully understand. Yeah. I've been having a lot of talks with my partner about, suicide, and just kind of about it, because my first experience was with my friend, killed himself when I was 14. Um, and then, over the last 4 or 5 years, definitely since the pandemic, there's been a number of people that I've known who have taken their own life. Um, and I think it's incredibly tragic, but knowing what I know and how bad I think things can get, in your own head, um, like, I understand it. And I think that people aren't willing to talk about it enough to understand it. It's always just kind of like that was selfish of them. There's always this negative kind of thing about it. And I think that it's important to have a broader conversation, a more constructive conversation around it, where people can then sympathize with it and understand it. And while it's incredibly difficult for the family and friends, in the aftermath, um, I always feel like there's a lot of discredit towards what actually pushed that person to that point.
I was reading something the other day about Kurt Cobain, and someone said, "Oh, he was a coward." And I don't know Kurt Cobain, never met him, don't know really anything about him other than the music, which obviously growing up in the 90s was a big thing for me. But I just thought, you have no idea. By the
Yeah.
time he got to that point, he would have been so desperate that he couldn't see any other way. And to just
Yeah.
imagine what you go through for that to become your thought process. And
Yep.
anyone that says, "Oh, you're a coward, you're weak," whatever, you have no. I don't want to swear because I don't know if you can on YouTube.
You can swear.
You
You
have
can.
no. You have no fucking idea at all
Yep.
of what someone goes through when they get to that. You should have your, incredible empathy for someone that does that, because
Yeah.
it wasn't caught by someone else before it happened. Because when someone's that low, they need someone to pick them up. They don't, then they're past the point of being able to pick themselves up.
Yeah. And it might not just be one, it might be a community. It might be a lot of people. And some of the people that I've known that have committed suicide, you would never have known that they were that depressed, that they were that sad,
Well, that's the
because
thing as well. People don't talk about it,
yeah, we don't talk about it. We
and
also
they
mask,
put the
right?
mask on.
Like,
Yep.
you put the mask on, you go to dinner, you smile, you
Mm-hmm.
shake hands, you go home, and your brain just spirals. And it
Put
can
the
be
normal suit
spiraling,
on, and
yeah, while you're there. Like, you can be at dinner and just like, oh my
yeah,
God, like, it's a constant. It's just on this vicious cycle that is so hard to break at times. Um, and yeah, I just wish there was more empathy. I wish there was more of a willingness to really understand it, and to sympathize with it. And because it's hard. It's really hard when people get, and I understand the anger. I understand the sadness. I understand like, it's misunderstood. Like, how could this happen, kind of thing. But
mm.
if we're asking ourselves those questions, I don't think we've really taken the time to understand it. Um, and
To
and
clarify,
I
when I said someone should pick them up, I don't mean the family. Obviously, one of the worst things about doing it is that the family feels that they're guilt somehow, and of course they're not.
Yeah,
Of course they're not.
yeah,
But yeah, you have to ask for help. We just have to have a society where it's not seen as being weak, because as soon as we have a society that empathizes with it, we'll have a society that is able to hear people cry out basically,
Yeah.
and makes it possible for them to ask for help.
Yep. Well, and it's so hard to ask for help, and men especially
Mm,
just don't ask for help. It's still just so ingrained in our culture, and that's just the hardest thing is that nobody asks for help, and if they do, sometimes it's too late or it's brushed off.
mm.
It's just kind of like, well, yeah, it's just smile, like it's like your life's great, and you're like, yeah. So sometimes that makes it worse. I could have an amazing life, and the fact that I'm so depressed or I'm so anxious that I can't see that exacerbates that. Like, you're like, well,
And also, I mean, you're basically saying your mask is fantastic.
mhm.
When they say your life is
Yeah,
great, it's
like,
like, yeah, I'm putting a lot of effort into maintaining, but that doesn't mean inside I'm
yeah,
healthy.
yep, very much so. And it's hard, and I think there's a lot of fear around it too. I think there's a lot of fear of people um, reacting in extreme ways where you're like, oh, I'm suicidal, and they're like, oh, well, like, let's get you committed, kind of, and you're like, that's
Mm.
that we're not there yet. Like, like, we don't need to take all the knives out of the house, but let's have a bigger conversation around this. Like, what can we do to kind of, do we need to talk to somebody? Should we explore medications? Should we explore, a sabbatical? Like, what do we need to do to help and to kind of move this, to move you away from that place of desperation where there's just one option?
I think we have to do more as well to educate
Without a
families
doubt.
and friends of people that are struggling, because quite often when people do ask for help, it's not going to be obvious that's what they're doing. You have to be able to hear it. You have to
Yeah.
know be able to decipher the clues, basically. And
Yep.
sometimes it can be someone's like gets angry very easily or gets upset very easily. That's a big symptom of anxiety,
Yeah.
of sort of losing emotional control. And it doesn't mean it means that they're struggling to maintain themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. They're right on the edge themselves. And
Mm,
I think it can be really hard because I think that there's just, again, there's so many cliches around this, right? Like, well, we got to help this person. And you're like, well,
mm.
so I'm going to ask them, like, how can I help you? And they might not know. And so it's like, okay, well, then how do you then recognize that there is symptomology happening that is concerning? And so how do you help in other ways, unspoken ways, kind of thing? Just by maybe helping your partner make an appointment, or, um, you know, planning, to watch a movie, just doing something that you don't necessarily have to be like, how can I help you? Tell me how you can help you, and I'll help you. It's like, okay, this is happening. I already kind of know this person. I know some things that might help, but I'm not going to just directly impose those on them. I'm going to kind of do it in a way where it's like, we've got to just try different things. And sometimes it needs to be a set of kid gloves, and sometimes it needs to be more direct.
I think first, though, they have to feel loved and secure.
100%.
And you might
And not a
think that
burden.
they are,
Like,
you might think, well, I do. I do love them. They are secure. But sometimes people really need to be shown that, because once
yeah,
they feel that, they'll be open to trusting you to go and get that appointment or get that help.
yep.
But if they don't, they'll feel like, oh, I don't need that. Leave me alone, kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. Like, I'll figure it out kind of thing. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
and yeah, I don't know. It's been a big core, motivation for the Cerulean Project, is really empowering both the people suffering and the people around them, to
Mm.
give them tools and understanding and the ability to either start a conversation or to facilitate how they can, um, without having to just like go into it blind, and and you know pin the tail on the, be like, I'll figure it out while I fumble around in the
Yeah.
dark. It's like, well, sometimes there isn't that much time, and sometimes it can feel exhausting to try and search it out yourself when you're in that place. Like, how do I help myself? And like, those can be really exhausting things. It can be really exhausting trying to email, half a dozen therapists and not getting any response, or saying that they don't have time. I mean, how long did you have to wait to see a therapist in the UK?
I think it was a year and a half on the NHS, because there is a bit of a mental health crisis here.
Yeah.
In fact, every now and again they check in on you and they do a questionnaire, and the questionnaire is basically to work out whether you're going to harm yourself or someone else. And the less you will likely to do that, the less further you go up the waiting list, obviously, because they need to get to the crisis cases first. So that gives you an idea, though, of how much it's crisis management and triage to try and a very creaky system. It's something I don't want to get into politics, but a new government got in July, and it's supposed to be a big priority for them, although we'll see. Governments make a lot of promises before they come in. And I'm hoping provision will get better, but it's still the problem. Although I don't think mental health is as stigmatized in the UK as American friends tell me it is over there. But it doesn't have parity of esteem in medical care with physical health. It doesn't have the same amount of funding and the same amount of effort put into it. It's still playing catch up on that.
Yeah, for sure.
It is improving, but
that's good.
These things are very slow. The problem when you have a national health service is it's the largest employer in Europe. It's huge. It's a big ship that turns extremely slowly, and to get it to change is a long-term project rather than a short-term thing.
Well, it's a lot of personnel to manage too, and to make sure that everybody's up to date, and
systems and thinking and all sorts of
Yeah, I've been in and out of therapy and mental health work for. I think I saw my first therapist when I was 9, and so almost 30 years, and more than that. Anyways, to see how much it's changed over that time in its understanding, in its application, in its training, is significant. And so I can imagine how hard it would be to, constantly update something that large, especially within just the last 5 to 10 years, how much therapy has advanced in its understanding of how the brain works. And again, how trauma impacts the brain, and how anxiety and depression and all of these things impact the brain. And especially with the pandemic, we saw a 70% rise in proton pump inhibitors over here, just for reflux. That alone, like, all of those people are having stress. All of that's low grade anxiety. And it's really starting to give a lot of data, but like, for people to have to keep up with that, and especially in such a large format, I got to imagine is very hard.
Actually, I said there wasn't a stigma here. There kind of was. I'm Gen X, and my parents' generation were still the stiff upper lip generation. So there's still a lot of people in the UK, the famous English British Reserve, that you don't talk about your personal business in public, and you don't talk about it to strangers. In fact, you don't talk about it outside the family.
You don't talk about it at all, right? Like,
yeah. And that, particularly for men, to be a good man, you're like a swan. There might be a lot going on under the water, but on the top it's perfectly serene. That's how a man's supposed to be. And
which is just so hard.
Hugely in the last 20 years, it's changed massively. And my son's generation really open to talking about anything like that.
That's great.
They're incredibly progressive as a generation, but it's only in the last 20 years it's really changed.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it's just been amazing to see those changes happen, and again, more resources go into it, and more understanding going into it. I've been really excited about a lot of these different treatments that have been happening over here, from psilocybin to ketamine, and how that affects the brain itself, and rewiring the brain has been really fascinating to me. And so I'm excited to kind of see where it goes. And I'm always excited when somebody's able to get in and begin to do the hard work, because it's important. And I would probably assume that you would attest that it's not easy. Your 2 sessions haven't been easy, right?
The first one, it finished at 3:30 p.m. and I couldn't do anything for the rest. I was useless then for the rest of the day. I couldn't work, couldn't do anything. It was like I'd run a marathon. It was just absolutely,
wow.
I've used the word a lot, but I could barely move. I was that exhausted. And I went to sleep that night at like 9, 10 p.m, whereas normally it's like 1, 2 a.m. It was draining. Yesterday was better, but still very tiring and very mentally taxing.
Yeah. Do they kind of talk? Have you learned more? Did you know about cognitive behavioral therapy before this, or was it something that your therapist talked to you about?
Yeah, I looked at doing it online before, but
Okay.
it didn't really work with me then. But so I was aware of what it is, and also I'm aware that my issues are cognitive, that it's learned pattern of thought and behaviors that I've ingrained in myself over 49, so probably 43 years. It started off not that much, but in the last 20, 30 years, it got deeper and deeper. So I'm aware that it's a behavior. So, I mean, the title alone says it all. It's about retraining my brain, really. And I'm realistic that I don't
Yep.
think it will ever go away, but maybe I can make the voices a bit quieter. And maybe I can have times now and then without the thoughts.
Definitely. It'll definitely happen. I've had a lot of success with cognitive behavioral therapy. It's, in my opinion, it's one of the really good ones that I find that can be very empowering. It's
Mm,
also, in my opinion, a tool that you can take with you from therapy. Whereas talk therapy is usually just kind of very, just again, just talk based and
mm,
kind of very rudimentary problem solving. But cognitive behavioral therapy is one of those tools that can go in your tool belt and serve you past then. And so I'm glad that you're able to have access to that.
mm. Me too, eventually. Although, this typical anxiety thing, I do worry now that I'm taking up a slot someone else who needs it more should be using,
Oh,
because
don't do that.
yeah,
Don't do that. You
but
need it. You know that you need it. Like,
this is the other thing I do. You'll recognize this, but people who don't have it won't. You're constantly trying to sabotage yourself. Constantly, there's this voice in your brain telling you. I mean, mine tells me that I'm an awful person constantly. Like self-loathing's a big part of it. And
mhm.
anytime I feel good about anything, it goes, well, yeah, but you forgot about this sort of thing.
Yep. Yeah, it definitely lives to self sabotage. It loves to downplay. I'm not able
Yep.
to enjoy like a
Mm.
success or anything. That gets really hard. And then, yeah, I deal with a lot of being a burden,
Mm. Yeah.
feeling like I'm
I
a
always
burden,
worry I'm
feeling
a
like my
burden on other people.
anxiety is a burden, my
Mm.
depression's a burden, um, that I'm not just a happy person that is just enjoying life, the life of the party kind of thing.
Mm.
Um, and so that gets really hard.
Yeah. I mean, at best, you feel like a buzzkill, that you're in the
For
corner
sure. Yeah.
worrying
Yep.
about stuff and being like morose, and everyone's looking at you and it's bringing down their mood, kind of thing. And that's the best.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really pride myself on being a very objective person. I like to observe. I
Mm.
like to try and really gather as much before I make a choice. But I think so often realism is viewed as pessimism,
Yeah.
and you have to kind of be obnoxiously optimistic in a way. And for people with anxiety, that just doesn't work. Like there's always a variable. There's always something that hasn't been worked out that we're waiting to see if it's going to work itself out. And there's an
Mm.
unknown, and that doesn't do well for anxiety.
You can never nail down all of the variables, but it's
Never.
like a constant compulsion to try to.
Yep.
And even when you think you have, you create new ones mentally to worry about. It's a very creative affliction, I've got to say.
Oh yeah, very much so.
And I wonder whether maybe creative people are more susceptible to it.
Yeah. And some of my understanding and reading about it definitely seems to afflict more creative people, definitely more visual people, things like that, because we're able to really in our head have that
Mm.
experience,
Yeah,
see
you
that
can really
experience,
flesh
live
out
that
the
experience.
way. You can see it happening.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, you can probably do it from a positive where you're like, I see this model in my head that I'm going to make, and when I
Mm.
make it, that's what I saw. And people are like, how do you do that? And you're like, it just like I'm just I can see that. And like you can see when the sky's falling when it isn't actually falling. And I think that that's just a huge misconception with anxiety. It's just like, well, don't worry. And you're like, yeah, I'd love if I could just not
Oh,
worry.
really?
Like,
I never thought of
yeah, I
that.
never thought about that. Like,
Yeah.
Oh, you mean
Oh,
like
damn.
depression?
If only
Just be
somebody said
happy,
that
don't be
sooner.
sad. Like, yeah, it's just
Yeah. Turn
it's
that
just
frown upside
this
down.
yeah, and that's been hard for me to understand from a standpoint of like, do people not want to understand it because it could be difficult, like just hard, emotionally hard, or is it something where they themselves are kind of scared of almost of acknowledging that that's something that they're with, and they just kind of continue to mask and lie to themselves?
I think for people who genuinely don't have any, and I think a lot of people have some level of anxiety. And like you said, during COVID, I think nearly everybody had some level of anxiety. But I think there are people out there who don't have a constant inner monologue. And I think they probably
This
don't
would be
have it
amazing.
because I know, you
Yeah.
fuckers. I wish, if there's a pill I could take for that, I would take it.
Oh,
Uh, but I think for those people that have really never experienced it and don't understand it at all, I think we probably underestimate how strange it is. I think when we're saying people should understand it, I think unless you've experienced it, you can't understand it.
yeah.
It's it's such an all pervasive, all encompassing thing. It leaches itself into every aspect of your thought and life, every single one. There's no
Every
escape
single
from
one.
it anywhere,
Yep.
including sleep.
Oh,
Every
yeah.
night I have anxiety dreams, every single night.
Yep.
Um, from the ridiculous, like being at work with no trousers on, looking down, oh my god, I'm not wearing any trousers, to far, like, really dark stuff sometimes. And you think, where the fuck did that come from? And that makes me anxious then, because I think, great, my brain can invent that stuff.
Yep.
Just there's no escape from it ever.
No,
And I
and then
think
you
for
wake
some
up in a
people,
fight or flight state and
yeah,
starts all over
I
again.
think for some people they just can't conceive of it. It just
Yeah.
totally beyond their comprehension
Agreed.
because they haven't experienced it. And you can explain it as much as you like, but to them it's like, well, a positive thought would probably fix that.
Yeah. Just, have, go have a beer or something. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I wonder too how much it also plays into that kind of, when you break your arm, people are like, "Oh, wow, like, oh my, are you okay?" Like they see the injury. But when it's an
Mm.
internal injury that can't be seen, I feel like there's this kind of there's not I feel like there's even more reluctancy to really try to understand it,
Yeah.
because then it can't be seen, it can't be identified. It's not something that like, "Oh, you broke your arm, that must hurt because I know breaking arms can hurt," kind of thing.
Mm.
Even though I haven't broken my arm, um, and so I feel like that kind of also plays into a bit of the downplay or dismissive nature towards some of these mental afflictions.
And it doesn't help that we mask as well, because
Yeah.
it means a lot of what we think other people must be able to see, they're not seeing because we're hiding it.
Yep.
But then if you didn't, you feel like you'd push everyone away.
Yeah, of course. Like nobody would want to be around you. And
Yeah.
so yeah, you get stuck in this sense of this somewhat of a purgatory between
Mm.
really being able to be myself and be this person that I'm supposed to be, but it's still not it still doesn't equate. Like it's still like for me, even if I play the game, even if I act the role, sometimes it still doesn't feel like it's good enough. And again, that just adds to the
Mm.
anxiety and adds to the depression, because people have their own lives and things like that. And not everybody is going to be your friend or everybody's going to click in some way. But um, again, for a storyteller, that can be extremely difficult.
It took me a long time to get used to the idea that some people you just can't get on with.
Yep.
And it's because one thing you do all the time is anything that doesn't go how you expect or how you want is your fault. It's because you did something wrong. And it took me a long time to understand sometimes when I meet people and we don't get on at all, that we just don't, you know, it's
Yeah.
unfortunate, but we're just, not compatible, basically.
Yeah. And
And it's
that's
not that they
nothing on
dislike
you.
me, and it's,
Yeah.
I don't dislike them. It's just we're not. But it took me a long time to get used to that because I used to just think, oh, they must think I'm a so.
Well, I'm glad you've been able to get over that, because that's, I know, can be difficult for a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, I still get it sometimes, but most of the time now I just think, oh, well, it's unfortunate, but it's how it is.
Yeah. Well, I know it's getting late over there. I could talk to you all day. I
Mm.
very much enjoy our
Yeah. We haven't even
conversations.
talked about models.
We haven't even talked about models. Let's talk
Yeah.
about something like that is a little bit more lighthearted. What are you working on right now that you're excited about?
I can't talk about it. I do
Well,
this
you've got a
thing
lot of
now.
3D models, right? Like that you're working on.
Yeah. Uh, I'm going to a Scale Model Challenge in October, and for me, it's the best show in the calendar. It's absolutely phenomenal. Um, it's one of the few shows I can go to as well because I feel like it's an incredibly welcoming show, and that's
That's
a lot
great
of
to
that
know.
down. It's down to Margot and Rob to organise it, but also the whole team and the ethos they encourage there and everything. It feels like getting a hug walking through the door. It's fantastic, really nice. It's
Nice.
a very positive event. Uh, but one of the things I miss about the early internet days is back then people didn't post everything they were doing online. They didn't constantly go, I stuck this bit to this bit today, check it out.
Yeah.
And they didn't go, this is the big model that I'm taking to the show. So I thought it would be really fun to have what I call secret projects where I work on a couple of things that I take to the show that I don't show to anyone. And then I
I
put them
love it.
down and I see how people, because you don't put your name on your entry at this show at the contest. You just get a sticker with a number on it, with your registration number in the contest. And put it down and I can see how people react to it without knowing who made it, without seeing it before. And it's really nice to be able to take a surprise, something that, well, it's probably not surprising. People go, oh yeah, that he probably made that, but
He
but
probably
to
did
take
that
something that
one
hasn't
because
been,
like
I kind of feel like we overexpose what we work on sometimes, and it takes the
Mm,
specialness away from it. So just to do that
agreed.
is really fun.
Yep.
So that's what I'm working on, secret projects.
Nice. I like it.
3D wise, I run Inside the Armour ITA 3, which is the third iteration of my Inside the Armour business. And I make 3D accessories and stuff for 135th Armour projects for 172nd and 148 aircraft, and bits for figures and stuff like that. So I'm working on new things, new weapons and stuff like that for diorama makers and figure painters and model makers for the show. So hopefully I'll choose
Very
some things
cool.
people like. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But it's
Do you
you
do
never
any
really know what
figures, or
people
is it
want.
just kind of accessories?
No, because I use Fusion, and Fusion's rubbish
Okay.
at organic things. It's very good at mechanical things. So
Okay.
I would like to learn uh, ZBrush, but I can't afford a license because it's not cheap. I'd love to be able to make figures. I do hand sculpt figures, but I don't sell them. They're just for my own
Oh,
projects.
nice. Very
Well,
cool.
I
And
say
is
sculpt. I use commercial heads and hands, and I do the bodies and
okay.
stuff myself.
And then do the bodies. Nice.
I do the easy parts,
Um,
yeah, but the difficult bit.
faces are so, I like the human elements, even drawing them. I'm an artist and a painter, and just drawing
Yeah.
hands and faces can just feet can be incredibly difficult. So sculpting them um, can be even harder, and just take it into 3D at that point too. And you're not even really using your hand to like press the groove in. It's more of a click and a pull of the XY axis, and can get very tricky. Are your accessories just World War II? Or are you doing World War One? Future
No, there's
accessories?
a lot of post World War II stuff as well. So,
Okay.
but it's mainly British at the moment because in the UK there's a big market for ex-forces guys that were in the army during, or the navy or the air force or whatever during the Cold War, and they want the stuff
Okay.
that they worked with and worked on and stuff like that. But this is an international business, so I need to find a way to kind of tap into what people want elsewhere.
Yeah.
I'd be quite happy to do fantasy stuff and stuff like that as well, but it's knowing what to make.
Yeah, that can get tough, especially when it gets into like the robots or the sci-fi kind of thing. Like, what scale, and is it for Gundam, or is it just more generic? Like, um, I know nothing about the Gundam lore for the most part. Like, it's a property that I don't really do much in. But I really love the 1/100 scale because it pairs with
Hmm.
1/72nd figures really well. And I feel like the accessories that you do for me, that's what really sells the scale of something. I think it's really hard when you just kind of like plop a figure or a vehicle or something down, and there's really nothing to kind of continue to build around that world. It's hard to get away from it looking like a toy. So if there's a flight deck and things like that, you're like, wow, like you really start to get lost in the details of it. So that's cool. And I never would have thought of Cold War, like 60s, 70s era weaponry.
Yeah, 80s maybe. Yeah, that sort of
80s.
thing.
Okay.
Yeah. One of my best sellers
Interesting.
is the L1A1 SLR, which is the British combat rifle from 1950 to 1980. There's a lot of
Wow.
guys that carried them, so there's a lot of
Okay.
guys that want them. But I have done, actually, I did do some sci-fi work. I'll see if you can see that. I hate when people hold things up. There we go. I did
Oh,
that for a
cool.
Land 13, a hover bike. I didn't do the figure. That was done by Robert Lane that runs the company, but I did the bike.
The
And it's
bike's
kind of,
beautiful.
I love those. I can't remember what they're called. It's motorbikes, but where it's, the handlebars are really low and it's a big engine. And is it a bobber? That are kind
Oh,
of
yeah,
very
yeah.
pared down, very stripped down, but also have a beautiful, just single line shape over the top from front to back. I love that shape. There's nothing that sticks up
Oh,
or
yeah.
sticks out. It's all contained within that curve. So that's what I was going for on that one.
That's cool. I think there's a BMW
That
that's
was fun to
similar to
do.
that, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
a BMW
So,
bike that has a big intake kind of thing. What
he
scale
does
is
that
that?
stuff, those 120.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, yeah. So
That's a
it's
great
max
scale.
scale, basically, MAK scale,
Yeah.
MAK, whatever you call it. Um, is it 120 or is it 116th? It might be 116th. No, it was 120. Yeah, it was 120.
Okay.
It's a good scale
So
because
yeah.
yeah, there's other stuff available in there that you can sort of accessorize your things with as well. But the reason I do weapons and stuff like that is injection molding is brilliant for aircraft, cars, machines, robots. But usually what lets these things down are the small details like the weapons and stuff like that. They tend to be
Yep.
quite simplified and quite basic. And the great thing about 3D printing is you can do a lot of stuff. I used to hand master stuff. I used to be a scratch builder. Used to scratch build tanks, whole ships, all kinds of stuff.
Wow.
And I said I'd never do 3D, but as soon as I started on Fusion, that was it. It was like a drug. I just couldn't stop. But you can print things that you could never injection mold or that you could never cast in RTV.
Yeah.
In rubber and stuff, and it's really exciting to be able to do those things. Although there are also
And then
limits to it, which are very frustrating as well sometimes.
yeah. What are some of the limits that you find?
There's a minimum thickness you can put on things, and when I was
Yep.
scratch building, I could get down to 0.2 of a millimeter, like what is that, 10,000, something like that, on a sheet, and it'd not be a problem with styrene. But with resin, it's going to warp sooner or later. Just look at it wrong, and it'll warp. And
Yep.
things like that are frustrating, and also the minimum height and depth of things for relief detail and stuff like that. And although I've seen people print whole tanks, it's a really bad idea because you're going to get layer lines somewhere.
Somewhere.
Even though
Yep.
anti-aliasing now is really good and printers are really good, if you try and do too much of a thing in one, you get print lines. So a lot of it for me is breaking it down so that it will print without issues. But then you run into the resin bloom thing with print, that your tolerances are very tricky because things don't fit together as well as they do with styrene. So if you break it
Yeah.
down too much, it becomes difficult to put it together, and it's a whole different problem. But you know, these challenges are great for taking your mind off the constant inner monologue.
Very
So
much so. Yeah.
yeah,
No,
yeah.
it's great to have those, and I really like. I've been really impressed with your work, and so that's why I asked
Thank
about it,
you.
because
Yeah.
I do feel like that is an area that is. I'm trying to clean up a seam line on a 135 light machine gun
Mm,
is very frustrating. So not having that, and then also having, I think, better details than the injection molds can
mm.
do is just fantastic. So that's really cool that you're doing that. When is
You,
the? Oh, go ahead.
you can make it sharper too, because the thing with injection
Mhm.
molding, it doesn't like doing a square molded relief detail. It tends to chamfer them off just to make
Mm,
it easier to release from the mold. And with
yeah,
printing, you can make it actually square, and it means prints generally look much sharper than most injection molding.
ammo boxes, magazines, things
Mm.
like that, just really nice and clean.
Yeah, any sharp detail comes out much better.
Nice. Well, will we be able to lure you into the Cerulean project next year, or do you have anything read this year that you'd like to enter?
Yeah, maybe there's I kind of I've been playing around with a few designs. I really like. There's a guy on Instagram called Ingramson who does Warhammer stuff, but he starts off with Warhammer parts and makes them into. I mean, this is something that comes up on my podcast all the time. He makes them kind of into art. I think they're like really
Yeah.
baroque, early Christian icons or something. They're really,
Yeah.
like ridiculously over the top and beautiful. And I love Spider Zero as well. Steven, is it on Instagram as well? He's a sculptor. I love his stuff. So I want to make something that's a bit strange and a bit disconcerting and a bit sort of creepy almost. I don't know.
I like it.
Something that's really strange, not
Yeah.
straightforward mech or something like that. But
No, the stranger the
making something
better, in
that
my
original
opinion.
it's very hard to conceive. That's the problem. I'm
Yeah.
waiting for the idea. So
Yeah. Yeah, I've really had fun with seeing opening up the show, so it's not just mecha, and seeing people really kind of do more like that. I just want to do this kind of like weird thing, like this. That I don't know if it'll work, but it really speaks to me, and like that's what I really have been very much enjoying seeing. Is just kind of people really experimenting and trying new things and stuff that really like speaks to them.
Also, I love hand sculpting. It's very mindful to make something with your hands. One of the reasons I used to love doing scratch building. And although 3D is great, it doesn't quite scratch the same itch. It doesn't give you the same connection with the thing you're making. So
100%.
whatever it is I make will be a bit 3D and a bit handmade and a bit,
I like it.
For the organic side of it. So
Yeah. Do you sculpt mainly miniatures, or have you done any like large sculpting?
no, just miniatures. I did
Okay.
large sculpting when I was at art college, but not a lot. And frankly, I wasn't very good at it. It's quite strange. I'm much better at things like that now than I was at art college. It's like everyone that goes to art college should make miniatures first.
Right? That should be part of it.
Yeah.
Actually, we're doing a pottery class, and I just our teacher, her husband, his thesis in art class in art school was this miniature, just like a miniature, all these different miniatures. And so that was the first time I'd ever heard of somebody in school having kind of like a main thesis be involving miniatures. It wasn't kind of quote unquote traditional art. So I think that could be a lot of fun. Did you
I do
major in
like
art?
ceramics, actually. Yeah, fine art, painting and printmaking.
Nice.
But I did
Very
a
cool.
little bit of ceramics on the side. I do like ceramics.
What type of like throwing like on the wheel or hand building or?
Hand building, yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to do the wheel, but I haven't. I need to sign up for a local class. One good thing about pottery is there's always a class somewhere. It's one of those things.
Definitely in the UK for sure.
Yeah.
We were actually just revisiting the Great Pottery Throwdown last night.
Yeah. I have to
Because
laugh on that though. They go, "Your modeling's really good." I think that's quite pedestrian, actually.
you're like, can I have a seat? Let me
Yeah.
come and give a swing real quick. Yeah, I think that would be really fun. You should, as a fellow anxiety sufferer, it's definitely a bit anxiety inducing at first, but if you just let go and slow down, it's actually so wonderful spinning on the wheel. Well, I mean, hand building,
Yeah.
it's just slowing down, rolling your coils kind of thing. Like there's something really beautiful about it that can't really be rushed.
There's something really wholesome about playing with clay, full stop, I think.
Yes.
Just
It's that the hands in the earth, right? Like really kind of
yeah.
smelling it, that tactile. You really get to feel the material with your hands.
You get the childhood mud pie thing, and it's you get taken back there, and it's great. It's a really, and then it's alchemy, putting it into the
Yeah.
kiln and getting it out again afterwards.
Yeah, this week coming up, we're gonna trim our pots, and then we get to do some alchemy with, whether we're putting oxides or different colors on it for the thing. So I'm really excited about that. We did cylinders and bowls, and I'm like, yeah, I would love to do this again. So it's, I think I would recommend a lot of people, everybody go and take a pottery class. That's whether you're hand building or on the wheel. I think it's something that's really relaxing and rewarding
Actually,
and
the finishing and
humbling.
firing is good for anxiety as well, because you never know how it's going to come out.
You gotta just let go, right? Like,
Yeah. You've got to learn to
hopefully it worked.
accept
Hopefully
it.
I got all the air out. Like, but
Yeah, hopefully it didn't explode in the kiln and take out all that.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think that's kind of a great lesson to apply to life, right? Is like there's only so many variables we can control, and then it's just kind of left up to the forces of nature.
That's the tricky part, identifying the things you can control and letting go of the things you can't.
Yep. Don't sweat the small shit.
Mm. Sounds easy, doesn't it?
Right? Like, I wish it was that easy. All those mottos that are written on walls, I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, if that was only that easy.
It's like, yeah, your brain doesn't invent extra small shit to fret about.
No, no. And it's, and it gets easier, but it's a lot of work. Like, my utility belt is very full, and it takes a
Mm.
lot of revisiting and a lot of, resharpening tools and things like that. And um but it's all worth it, because there are those moments where we put on a new pair of glasses and realize how brilliant the world is. And if we can just have moments like that.
It's younger people I worry for, because I think part of learning to deal with it is getting older and finding out who you are. And when you're
Definitely.
younger and you don't know, then you don't have that, and it's even harder, I think.
For sure. And and the one thing that I try to do is really educate parents
Mm.
on mental health too, because so often children look to adults to model that type of behavior and things like that. And so I think it's we don't have kids, but it's something um, that I know a lot of parents can struggle with sometimes too, because you're dealing with anxiety and now your kid's dealing with it. Like, how do you then work through these things? And I think the more that you know, the better understanding that you have, again, empowers you then to be a better role model to help your children navigate those waters a little bit easier than we did. We were just kind of a sink or swim, or ignore it, ignore it till you get
Yeah.
older, and it becomes a crippling mental, mental.
Well, the longer you put it off, the harder it is to fix it, because the more
Yeah,
entrenched it becomes. So
yeah. Well, and it
yeah.
becomes. I sometimes talk about like my depression. My depression is a warm blanket.
Mm.
And people don't really like how, like, it's so crippling, it's so disabling, like, it's so horrible. And I'm like, yeah, but like, it's been there for so long, like, it's never
And it's
left, like,
mine.
it's
It's
mine, and
all mine.
yeah, it gives these narratives that,
Mm.
validate post-truth and things like that, where you're like, I want to believe this. And depression's like, oh boy, do I have a story for you. And anxiety's like, I got one too. Like, tell mine first. Like, and you find yourself in these really difficult situations. And so I think for developing minds, giving them as much support as we can is really important. A recent study actually came out about children's minds developing during the pandemic and how significantly they aged during that
Mm.
time. That was very unnatural to the just the natural progression of an aging mind.
I have to admit, being a parent, that it's my greatest concern about, because I think kids learn behaviors from their parents. So I did mask a lot with my son because I didn't want him to see it and learn it and become it. But at one point, I thought I just need to tell him so that he knows why I'm like this,
Yeah.
but also so that he knows if he's ever like this, and God, please don't let him ever be like this. But if he is, he knows he can talk about it. Because I thought at one point, the more I mask it, he's not stupid. He's going to notice that's what I'm doing, and he's going to think that's what you should do. So,
Yep.
but I'm pleased to say he's more balanced now than I am at any point in my life. So I don't know what's wrong with him, but it's like he's so sorted. It's unbelievable. At least that's the way he presents. But,
Yeah, well, I'm really proud of you as a parent for making that
mm.
crossing that threshold and dropping the mask and being open with your son about that, because it's really important. Those
I have
conversations, I mean, it feels.
involuntary vocalizations as well. So it was only a matter of time before we noticed them. So I had to, head that off basically.
Yeah, well, a lot of people don't, and so I just want to let you know that I'm really proud of you for doing
Mm.
that. And um, I think it's really important, so
Well,
thank you.
it's our role, isn't it, to make them the best people they can be. So, as a parent, that's what you're there for. So, is to give them the best start in life they could possibly have and to make them the best person they could be. So,
Well, and if
you
you learn
can't
a
lie
new
to them.
tool, like,
Never
yeah,
lie
if
to
you
them.
learn a new tool, share the tools with them, and
Mm.
that'll only help them. It's kind of I think you, as yourself, you're like, if I was young and somebody was able to communicate these things to me, how much different life could have been.
It's hard when you see these things in other people and you want to say something. You want to, reach out and say, it's not just you.
Yeah,
You're not alone.
you're not alone.
Mm.
That's the big one. And I really want to thank you for coming on to this show and sharing your experience, because this is all part of letting people know they're not alone. Like, um, these things affect us, many of us, and in different ways and in same ways. And, um, we all, whether we've just started therapy or we've been in therapy for a long time, it's really about personalizing these experiences so that people can understand that they're just not alone.
I think sometimes a lot of the main symptoms are talked about, but a lot of the other things aren't. And I think it's the details sometimes that people can identify with. I want to thank you as well for all the work you do and all the tools you give to people and all the
Well, thank you.
conversations you have, because I think it's really important. And I think I know how much work must go into it as well. And you're doing a really fantastic thing.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yeah. Just want to try and make the world a little bit better. Just help
Yeah,
people
a
where I
little bit
can.
easier. Yeah.
A little bit easier. Just a little bit easier.
Amen.
We all got it, no matter how good our life is, it can be hard.
Mm.
So,
And it's okay to
well,
ask
thank
for
you.
help.
Yes, it is okay to ask for help. And I think that's the biggest thing. And making that step, right? Taking
Yeah.
that step and to ask for help. Well, Chris, I don't want to keep you again, I'll keep you all night, but I don't want to keep you any longer. My man, we will be more than happy to talk again. Please, have yourself a really good night. And again, thank you so much for your time and sharing with us.
Thank you.
I will close us out and catch up with you here in just a second.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for our first talk. Really appreciate you coming tonight. Please make sure to check out all of our previous talks that we have over the years and tune in for our other talks that we've got scheduled for the rest of this year. And with that, have yourself a great night.